He went out hunting criminals, but instead found the only Apache woman a cowboy could ever love. He had been riding alone for so long that the sound of his horse's hooves on dry ground felt like the only steady rhythm in his life. Towns came and went behind him like passing clouds. Some places welcomed him, some only tolerated him, and most never learned his name. People simply called him a cowboy who hunted criminals. That was enough. He did not stay long enough anywhere to be known for more than his work. He would arrive, listen quietly, follow the trouble, and leave before the dust settled. It was a life built on movement, and he had grown used to it. Still, there were nights when the wide sky felt too big and the silence too heavy, even for a man who claimed he preferred being alone. He rode with purpose that morning, crossing a stretch of land where the wind pushed against him like a warning. The plains were dry and pale, broken by distant hills and lines of rocky ground. Far ahead, mountains stood like silent watchers. He had been told that beyond those hills, trouble was growing. Supplies were going missing. Wagons had been stopped along lonely trails. The small towns were growing tense, and people were beginning to look at one another with suspicion. Some blamed outlaws passing through. Others blamed nearby groups they did not fully understand. Rumors spread quickly in places where fear had room to grow. Destrious. He had heard about it in a dusty town 2 days earlier. The sheriff there had been tired and worried. He spoke of tracks leading in many directions, of stories that did not match, of a feeling that something bigger was happening. The cowboy had listened without interrupting. When the sheriff finished, the cowboy had simply nodded and agreed to ride out. That was all. He never asked for more than a few supplies and a direction. He did not make promises, but people trusted that he would do what he could. It was enough for them, and enough for him. Now he followed the trail across open land, eyes scanning the ground and the horizon at the same time. He had learned long ago that danger rarely announced itself. It showed in small signs: a broken branch, a disturbed patch of dust, a quiet shift in the wind. He watched for those things without thinking. His mind worked calmly, the way it always did when he was tracking. Yet something about this land felt different. The air carried a stillness that was not peaceful. It felt like a pause before something changed. He stopped near a line of low rocks and let his horse drink from a shallow stream. The water moved slowly, reflecting the sky like a thin sheet of glass. He knelt beside it, splashed some water on his face, and looked at the ground nearby. Tracks crossed the area in several directions. Some were from wagons, some from riders, and some were older than the rest. He studied them carefully.
The criminals he followed were moving fast, but not carefully enough.
They had passed through here. That much was clear. But there was something else. Another set of tracks moved through the area with more purpose. They were lighter, more controlled, almost hidden. Whoever made them knew how to travel without leaving much behind. He stood slowly, eyes narrowing. He was not the only one tracking. That realization did not bother him, but it made him alert. Out on the plains, it was rare to find someone who moved with such skill unless they had lived on the land for a long time. He followed the direction of those lighter tracks for a short distance, then stopped himself. His job was to find the criminals, not chase shadows. Still, he could not ignore the feeling that he was being watched, or perhaps guided. The land seemed to hold more stories than he had expected. As the sun climbed higher, he rode toward the distant hills. The ground became rougher, and the wind picked up dust that swirled around him in soft clouds. He passed the remains of an old campfire, now cold and scattered. Nearby he found signs of a struggle, footprints pressed deep into the earth. marks where supplies had been taken quickly. The criminals were not careful. They were growing bold. That kind of carelessness often came from confidence, and confidence could lead to bigger trouble. He studied the scene, then moved on, keeping a steady pace. Hours passed. The sun began to fall toward the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and red. He reached the edge of a narrow canyon where the land dropped sharply. Bah! Shadows stretched across the rocks, making the path ahead darker and more uncertain. He paused at the entrance and listened. The canyon carried sound differently. A small movement could echo for a long distance. He heard the wind moving through the rocks, the faint call of a bird somewhere above. And then, something else. It was not loud, just a subtle shift, like a stone being moved carefully. He remained still, one hand resting near his side. He did not call out. Instead, he waited. After a moment, the sound stopped. Whoever had made it knew he was aware. He felt it clearly now. Someone else was nearby, moving with intention. He did not feel threatened, but he knew he was not alone. Breath. That realization brought a strange sense of curiosity. He had spent years being the only one on a trail, the only one watching for signs. Now he was sharing the path with someone he could not yet see. The sky darkened as evening settled over the canyon. He led his horse to a small flat area and made a simple camp. He did not light a large fire, only a small one for warmth and cooking. He ate quietly and watched the shadows move along the canyon walls. The feeling of being observed did not fade, but it did not feel hostile. It felt like someone measuring him, the way he measured others. He almost smiled at the thought. It had been a long time since anyone had kept up with him on a trail. As night deepened, stars filled the sky above the narrow strip of canyon. He lay back against his saddle and looked up at them. He had always found comfort in the open sky. It reminded him that the world was wide and that a single life moved through it, like a small story. Yet tonight the sky felt closer, as if the land itself were paying attention. He wondered briefly who else might be following the same trail and why. Perhaps someone with their own reasons. Perhaps someone protecting something. He did not know yet. Before sleeping, he checked the ground once more. Near the edge of his camp, he found a faint sign, footprints that had appeared after he stopped.
They were careful and light, placed with skill. Whoever made them had come close enough to watch him and then moved on.
He studied the direction they went. They led deeper into the canyon, the same direction he needed to go in the morning. He sat back and let out a slow breath. For the first time in a long while, he felt something other than routine. He felt curiosity, and perhaps a quiet sense of anticipation. He slept lightly, as he always did when on a trail. At dawn, he woke to a sky turning pale blue. The canyon was calm, the air cool. He packed his gear and mounted his horse, ready to continue. The tracks of the criminals still led forward. So did the lighter tracks of the unknown traveler. He followed both, knowing that sooner or later their paths would meet. He had come to this land to hunt criminals and restore some measure of peace. That had not changed. But as he rode deeper into the canyon, he sensed that this journey would not be like the others. Something in this place was already shifting the course of his life, though he did not yet know how. The canyon grew narrower as he rode deeper into it, and the rising sun painted the rocks in soft shades of gold and orange.
The air was cool, and the ground held the marks of many journeys.
Row. He followed the trail carefully, reading the signs left behind. The criminals had passed through here in a hurry. Their horses had moved fast, and their steps were heavy. They were not trying to hide their path. They believed no one could catch them in this rough land. But he also saw the lighter tracks again. They moved along the edges of the canyon, sometimes on the rocks, sometimes through patches of sand. Whoever made them knew how to move without being noticed. Breath. They had stayed just out of sight, never crossing directly into his path, yet always near enough to watch. He had spent years tracking people, and he could tell when someone was skilled. This person was more than skilled. They were patient and calm, and they knew the land in a way he did not. Narration. He slowed his horse and listened. The canyon carried sounds in strange ways. A small step could echo far away, while a louder movement might vanish into the wind. He heard the soft rustle of air moving between the rocks and the faint call of a bird overhead. Then, for just a moment, he caught another sound. It was quick and quiet, like a foot touching stone and then stopping. He turned his head slightly but did not reach for anything. Instead, he spoke in a calm voice. "I know someone's there," he said quietly. "I'm not here to cause trouble." The words faded into the canyon. For a moment, there was no reply. Then, from the shadow of a large rock, a figure stepped forward. She moved with confidence and balance, her eyes steady and clear. She did not rush, and she did not hide. She simply stood where the light met the shadow and watched him.
He noticed her calm expression first.
She did not look afraid. She looked alert, like someone who understood the risks of the land but did not fear them. Her clothing blended with the colors of the canyon, and her posture showed strength and control. She held no sign of panic, only awareness. It was clear she had been following the same trail for some time. They stood in silence for a few seconds, studying each other. He had met many people on the road, but this moment felt different. She did not treat him like a stranger to be avoided, or an enemy to be challenged. She treated him like someone to be measured carefully.
He respected that. "You've been tracking them," he said after a moment, nodding toward the deeper part of the canyon.
She gave a small nod in return. "Yes," she said calmly.
"They've been moving through this land for days." Her voice was steady and clear. There was no anger in it, only purpose.
He could hear that she spoke with certainty, like someone who knew every path and turn of the land around them.
"I'm after them too,"
he said. "They've caused trouble in the towns nearby."
"I know," she replied. "They've caused trouble here as well. The wind moved between them, carrying dust and the faint scent of dry earth."
He could sense the distance between their worlds. They came from different lives, different experiences, and different histories. Yet they were standing on the same trail for the same reason. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He knew trust would not come quickly.
"Out here, people learn to be careful."
Words alone meant little. Actions mattered more. Still, there was no hostility in her stance, only caution. He respected that too.
"I don't plan to stay long," he said. "Just long enough to stop them."
She watched him closely.
"And then you'll leave?"
"That's usually how it goes," he answered. She looked toward the canyon ahead, where the trail disappeared between tall rocks. "They're not just stealing supplies," she said. "They're trying to make people turn against each other. They want confusion. They want blame to spread."
He had already suspected something like that.
The signs did not match simple theft. Too many small events had been arranged in ways that stirred tension. "I've seen the same," he said. "If they keep going, it'll get worse." She nodded once. "Then we both have reason to stop them." The sun rose higher, and the canyon began to warm. Shadows pulled back, revealing more of the narrow path ahead. I studied her again. She stood with quiet strength, not trying to prove anything, not trying to threaten him. She was simply there, certain of her purpose. "You know this land better than I do," he said. Breaths. "You've been ahead of me since yesterday, and you track people well," she replied. "You've been close behind them." There was a moment of understanding in those words. Brit. They each recognized skill in the other. Respect began to take shape, even if trust was still far away. "We can follow the same trail," he said carefully. "No need to get in each other's way." She considered this for a moment. "If we follow the same trail," she said, "we should share what we see. Otherwise, we slow each other down." Brit. He nodded.
Fair enough. They did not shake hands or make any grand agreement.
They simply turned toward the path ahead and began moving in the same direction. It was not a partnership yet. It was an understanding, two people with the same goal, walking the same path. As they moved deeper into the canyon, he noticed how she read the land. She watched the wind, the rocks, and the small signs others would miss. At times, she would pause and point to something. A mark on a stone, a broken plant, a faint line in the dust. Each sign told part of the story of where the criminals had gone and how fast they were moving. He shared what he noticed too. He pointed out deeper tracks where the criminals' horses had stumbled and signs of a camp they had left in a hurry. Slowly, they began to work together without needing many words. The path grew rougher as they went. At one point, they had to lead their horses through a narrow passage where the rocks pressed close on both sides. The sound of their steps echoed softly. When they reached the other side, the canyon opened slightly, revealing a wider stretch of land dotted with small bushes and scattered stones. They stopped near a shaded area to rest their horses. Neither of them spoke much at first. They drank water and looked out over the land ahead. The trail of the criminals was still clear. They were moving toward a set of hills in the distance. "You've been alone on this trail," he said after a while. "Yes," she answered. "That takes patience." She gave a small smile. "Desps, so does riding from town to town without staying." He looked at her, slightly surprised. She had noticed more than he expected. "You've been watching closely," he said.
"I watch everything," she replied simply.
There was no challenge in her tone, only truth. He found himself respecting her more with each moment. She was not trying to prove herself. She did not need to. Her actions spoke clearly enough. As they prepared to move again, he felt something he had not felt in a long time, a sense that he was not alone on this journey. It was not a feeling of dependence or weakness. It was simply the awareness that someone else understood the trail as deeply as he did. Someone else was walking beside him, not behind or ahead, but alongside. They rode on as the day moved forward, following the path through the hills. The wind carried the promise of more challenges ahead, yet there was also a quiet sense of balance between them. They were still cautious, still careful with their words, but they were no longer strangers passing in the distance. They were two travelers with a shared purpose, moving toward the same goal. Neither of them spoke about what would happen after the criminals were caught. That was a question for another time. For now, the trail stretched ahead, and they followed it together, step by step through the wide and watchful land. They rode side by side as the morning light stretched across the hills and the land slowly opened into a wide valley. The air felt warmer now, and the wind carried the soft smell of dry grass and dust. The trail of the men they were tracking continued ahead, but it was not as clear as before. The criminals had started to move more carefully. Their steps were lighter, their path less direct. It was as if they knew someone was following them. Pass. The cowboy noticed it first. He slowed his horse and leaned forward slightly, studying the ground. The prints were still there, but they spread out and overlapped in confusing ways. Some led toward a rocky slope, while others curved toward a patch of trees.
It was a common trick used by people who did not want to be found easily. He looked at the woman beside him and saw that she had already noticed the same thing.
"They're trying to hide their path," he said. She nodded.
"Yes, but they are not as careful as they think."
She guided her horse toward the rocky slope and dismounted. He followed, watching as she moved across the stones with quiet confidence.
She studied the ground, the rocks, and even the small plants growing between them. After a moment, she pointed toward a narrow path that curved behind the slope.
"They went this way," she said. "They tried to step on stone, but one of them slipped." Breaths. He stepped closer and saw the mark she meant, a faint scrape on the rock and a deeper footprint where someone had lost balance for just a second. It was the kind of sign most people would miss. He gave a small nod of respect. "You see things most people don't," he said briefly. "So do you." They continued on foot for a while, leading their horses carefully along the narrow path. The valley ahead was quiet, and the sky stretched wide above them. There was no sign of the men they followed, but both of them knew they were close. The trail felt fresh. The ground still held the marks of recent movement. Breath. As they walked, their silence felt less tense than before. It was no longer the silence of strangers. It was the silence of two people focused on the same task. Still, small moments of conversation began to grow between them.
"You've been doing this a long time," she said after a while. "Tracking?" he asked. "Riding alone. Helping towns." Ooh. He thought for a moment before answering. "Long enough that it feels normal," he said. "I go where there's trouble. I do what I can. Then I leave." And, you...
He shook his head slightly. "Staying makes things complicated."
She seemed to understand that without asking more. "Sometimes leaving is complicated too," she said quietly.
They walked a little farther before stopping near a small stream that cut through the valley. The water moved slowly, reflecting the sky in soft waves.
They let their horses drink while they rested. He sat on a flat stone and watched the water.
She stood nearby, looking toward the hills ahead. "Why do you track them?" he asked after a moment. She did not answer right away. Instead, she crouched near the water and touched it lightly, as if feeling its movement. Then she stood and faced him. "They bring trouble to this land," she said. "They take what does not belong to them. They leave confusion behind. People start to blame each other. That kind of trouble spreads."
Breaths.
He nodded. "I've seen it before." She looked at him with a thoughtful expression.
"And you still ride toward it?" He gave a small shrug. "Someone has to." The wind moved gently through the valley, rustling the grass and carrying distant sounds. It felt like the land itself was listening. They mounted their horses again and continued forward. The trail led toward a cluster of low hills with scattered trees and patches of shade. It was the kind of place where people could hide for a while. As they approached, they slowed down, but the ground here was softer, and the tracks became clearer again. He noticed signs of a recent camp, ashes from a small fire, footprints pressed into the dirt, and marks where horses had been tied.
The criminals had rested here not long ago. They're not far, he said.
She nodded. They will move again soon. They moved carefully around the edge of the area, studying every sign.
The men they followed were beginning to realize they were not alone. Their path showed signs of caution now. Still, they could not hide everything. Small mistakes gave them away. The day grew warmer and the sun climbed higher. They rode along the edge of the hills, keeping to the shadows when they could. At one point they stopped at a high ridge and looked out over the land below. From there, they could see a long stretch of open ground and a narrow trail winding through it. He felt a strange sense of calm standing there. The journey had already been longer than most of his jobs, but yet it did not feel heavy.
For the first time in a long while, he did not feel like he was carrying the work alone.
The woman beside him moved with quiet strength, always aware of the land, always focused on the path ahead. As the afternoon light softened, they found a safe place to rest for a short while. They sat near a patch of shade, their horses grazing nearby. The silence between them felt comfortable now, not tense, as he realized he had begun to trust her without even noticing when it happened. You move through this land like it's part of you, he said.
Breath. She looked out toward the hills. It is part of me.
He understood that. He had spent years on the move, but he had never belonged to any place. The land had always been something he passed through, not something he stayed with. Watching her, he began to see what it meant to know a place deeply. "You're not what I expected," he admitted. She glanced at him with a faint smile.
Neither are you. They shared a brief moment of quiet understanding. Neither of them spoke about the future.
They both knew that once the trail ended, their paths might separate. Still, there was a growing sense that this journey was different from any they had taken before. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in soft colors, they prepared to move again. The trail of the men they followed led toward a narrow pass between two hills. The air felt cooler now, and the wind carried a sense of change. They rode forward together, their pace steady and calm. Trust had grown between them, slowly built on shared effort and quiet respect. It was not loud or dramatic. It was steady, like the rhythm of their horses' steps. The narrow pass between the hills felt cooler than the open valley behind them. Tall rocks rose on both sides, and the sky above looked like a thin ribbon of blue. The cowboy and the woman rode slowly, careful with every step. The ground showed clear signs now. The men they were tracking had passed through not long ago. Their horses had left deep marks, and small pieces of cloth and rope lay scattered near the edges of the trail. It looked like the group had been in a hurry, perhaps worried about being followed. The cowboy studied the path ahead and then glanced at the woman. She had already noticed the same things. Her eyes moved over the land with calm focus, reading each sign as if it were a message written for her alone. She stopped her horse and crouched near the ground, touching a faint mark in the dust. "They stopped here for a short time," she said. "Not long, just enough to decide where to go next." He nodded. They're trying to stay ahead of us. They know someone is close, she replied. They moved forward on foot for a while, leading their horses quietly. The pass opened into a wider area surrounded by low hills and scattered trees. It was the kind of place people might choose to rest if they wanted to stay hidden. The ground here showed more signs of recent movement. Ashes from a small fire, footprints crossing in different directions, and marks where supplies had been set down and picked up again. The cowboy walked slowly around the area, taking in every detail. But he noticed something that did not fit. Near one of the trees, he found a piece of cloth tied to a branch. It looked ordinary at first, but the way it was placed suggested something else. It was meant to be seen by someone who knew what to look for.
They left this on purpose,
he said. The woman stepped closer and examined it.
Yes, she agreed. They want someone to find it.
Maybe to send a message. Maybe to confuse. He looked around again, his mind working through the possibilities.
They're not just running, he said. Bob Ann.
They're planning something. She nodded. They've been moving between different places, picking supplies from one side and leaving signs that make it look like someone else did it. People start to mistrust each other. They argue. They stop listening. That's what these men want. The cowboy had seen that kind of trouble before. It was not always loud or obvious at first. It started quietly, with small acts that created doubt.
Then it grew until people who once lived peacefully began to turn against one another. They want the land to feel unsafe, he said.
Psh! So they can move through it without being stopped.
Yes,
she said. Shh! If everyone is busy blaming each other, no one watches them. They stood in silence for a moment, both understanding how serious the situation had become. This was no longer just a simple chase.
the men they followed were trying to create bigger problems than anyone realized. If they succeeded, the land would grow tense and divided.
Small disagreements could turn into lasting harm. We have to stop them before they reach the next town, the cowboy said.
If they cause more confusion there, it'll spread. She looked toward the hills beyond the camp. They will go that way, she said.
There's a trail that leads to a supply route. If they reach it, they can take more and leave more false signs. He followed her gaze and saw the path she meant. It wound between the hills and disappeared into a line of trees. The sun was already beginning to move lower in the sky. They did not have much time. They mounted their horses and rode quickly but carefully along the trail. The wind picked up, carrying dust across the ground. As they rode, they spoke more openly than before. The seriousness of the situation had brought them closer in purpose. "You've been watching them for days," he said. "Why didn't you stop them sooner?" She kept her eyes on the trail ahead. "I needed to know what they were doing," she answered.
If I stopped them too soon, others might take their place. Now I know their plan.
Now it can end. He respected that. It took patience to wait and learn before acting. It also took courage to face a group like this alone. He realized that she had been carrying this responsibility long before he arrived.
"You didn't have to do it alone," he said quietly.
She glanced at him. "And yet I did." He did not argue with that. He understood what it meant to carry a task without help. Still, he was glad he had crossed her path. Together they had a better chance of stopping the trouble before it grew. Base. As they reached the edge of the trees, they slowed again. The trail became harder to follow here, with fallen leaves and soft earth covering the ground, broken branches, marks where horses had passed, and faint footprints leading deeper into the trees. They dismounted and moved forward carefully. The air felt still, and even the birds seemed quiet. After a short distance, they saw movement ahead. The men they had been tracking were gathered near a clearing, sorting through stolen supplies and speaking in low voices. They looked tired but confident, as if they believed they had escaped notice. The cowboy and the woman stayed hidden behind a line of trees, watching. They did not rush forward. Instead, they waited for the right moment. They had learned to trust each other's timing. A quick glance was enough to show they were ready. When the moment came, they stepped into the clearing with calm determination. Their presence surprised the group. The men had not expected anyone to follow them so closely. Bray. The cowboy spoke first, his voice steady and clear. "It's over!" he said. "You won't be causing more trouble here." The woman stood beside him, calm and strong. Together they made it clear that the chase had ended. The men realized they had been outmatched, not just by skill but by patience and understanding of the land. They could not continue their plan. The confrontation did not last long. The criminals were stopped before they could move again, and the supplies they had taken were recovered. More importantly, their plan to create confusion and mistrust was ended before it could grow further. As the sun set and the clearing grew quiet, the cowboy felt a deep sense of relief. The land around them felt calmer now, as if a weight had lifted. He looked at the woman and saw the same quiet relief in her expression. "Bright, it's done," he said.
"Yes," she replied.
"It's done!"
They gathered what needed to be returned and prepared to leave the clearing. The work had been hard, but it had brought them to this moment of calm.
The land would have time to heal. The people who lived nearby would not face the confusion the criminals had planned.
As they walked back toward their horses, the cowboy realized something had changed within him. He had come to this place to do a job and then leave, as he always did. But this time, the journey had been different.
He had not worked alone.
He had shared the trail with someone who understood the land and the purpose as deeply as he did. The sky above them turned soft shades of evening. The wind moved gently through the trees. The path ahead was quieter now, but it still held questions. What came next was not yet clear. Still, he knew this experience would stay with him long after the trail ended. Bah.
The evening settled slowly over the land as they rode away from the clearing. The sky turned soft shades of orange and purple, and the wind carried a calm feeling that had not been there before. But trouble they had been following for days was finally over. The men who caused it would not bring more confusion to the towns or the nearby lands.
The path ahead felt quieter, almost peaceful, as if the ground itself had taken a long breath. They did not speak much at first. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It felt steady, like the kind of silence that comes after hard work is finished.
A cowboy rode with a relaxed posture for the first time in days. He looked at the horizon and then at the trail beneath his horse.
But normally this would be the moment when he turned another direction, heading toward the next town or the next piece of trouble. That was the way his life had always worked. He finished a job, made sure things were calm again, and then moved on before anyone could ask him to stay. But this time felt different. They reached the edge of the hills and stopped near a small stream where the water moved slowly over smooth stones. The sound of it was gentle and steady. Both of them dismounted and let their horses drink. The air was cool, and the sky above them was full of early stars. "It will be quiet here again," she said softly, looking out across the land He nodded. It should be. He knelt near the stream and splashed a little water on his face. The journey had been long, but it had not felt lonely in the way his travels usually did. He realized that he had grown used to seeing her riding beside him, used to the quiet understanding that had formed between them. It was a strange feeling, one he had not expected. She sat on a flat rock nearby, watching the water. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she looked at him.
"You will leave in the morning," she said.
It was not a question. It sounded like something she believed to be true. He stood and looked at the land around them, the hills, the trees, the wide open sky. It all felt different now. He thought about the many trails he had followed over the years, the many towns he had passed through.
He had always believed that staying in one place would only bring trouble or disappointment.
Moving on had been easier.
That's what I usually do, he said slowly.
She nodded once, as if she had expected that answer. You have your path, she said, breath.
And you have yours, he replied. They both understood that their lives had been shaped by different experiences.
She belonged to this land in a way he never had. She knew its seasons, its quiet places, its hidden paths. He had spent most of his life riding through lands without calling any of them home. For a long time, that had been enough for him. They'd built a small fire as the night grew cooler. The flames moved gently, casting soft light on the ground around them. They shared a simple meal and sat in comfortable silence. The stars above them were bright and endless. After a while, he spoke again. When I first came here, I thought this would be like any other job, he said. Track the trouble, stop it, and ride on. Day.
But it wasn't,
she said.
No, he admitted.
It wasn't.
He watched the fire for a moment, then continued. Working with you changed things.
Breaths.
I didn't expect that. I've been riding alone for so long that I forgot what it felt like to trust someone on the trail.
Breath.
She listened quietly. Trust takes time, she said.
It grows slowly. He nodded. It did. He agreed. And now I'm not sure I want to go back to the way things were before. The words surprised him even as he spoke them. He had never said anything like that out loud. For years, he had believed that moving on was the only way to live. Staying meant facing things he was not ready for. But this journey had shown him another way. She looked at him carefully, her expression calm but thoughtful. The land here is not easy, she said. Life here takes patience.
It takes respect. I know, he said. I've seen that.
The night felt peaceful, but there was also a quiet sense that something important was being decided. Neither of them rushed the moment. They had learned to let things unfold in their own time.
What will you do?
She asked gently. Braith. He looked out at the dark outline of the hills.
I don't know yet, he admitted.
But for the first time in a long while, I'm not in a hurry to leave. She did not smile widely or show surprise. Instead, she gave a small, understanding nod. Breathless.
Then stay for a while,
she said.
Help where you can.
Best. Learn what you need to learn. There is always work to be done here, but it is not the kind you can finish in a day and ride away from. Breaths. He thought about that. Staying did not mean giving up who he was. It simply meant allowing his path to change. He realized that he did not have to decide everything at once. He could stay and see where the days led. The fire burned low, and they rested under the wide sky. When morning came, the land looked fresh and calm. The light touched the hills and the stream, bringing out the soft colors of the earth. He woke early, as he always did, and stood for a moment looking at the trail that led away from the valley. He knew he could still follow it. He could return to his old life of riding from place to place, but he did not mount his horse right away. Instead, he walked to the edge of the stream and watched the water move over the stones. He thought about the journey that had brought him here. He had come to hunt criminals, to restore order, and to leave.
Instead, he had found something he had not been searching for, a connection, a sense of purpose that did not end when the job was done. She joined him by the stream.
Neither of them spoke for a moment. The quiet morning felt full of possibility.
"I'll stay for a while," he said finally, "if that's all right."
She looked at him and gave a small, warm smile.
"It is," she said.
There were no grand promises, no loud declarations. They did not need them. What they had built on the trail was based on respect and shared effort.
That was enough to begin something new. Days turned into weeks as he remained near the valley.
He helped where he could, using his skills to keep the area safe and calm. He learned more about the land, about its quiet rhythms, and its hidden paths. She showed him places he would never have found on his own. In return, he shared what he knew about tracking and watching for signs of trouble. They worked side by side, not as strangers anymore, but as partners who understood each other's strengths. The people in nearby towns began to notice the change.
The land felt more peaceful, and the tension that had once lingered began to fade.
The cowboy who had once ridden alone was now part of something steadier. He still carried his quiet nature, still preferred simple words and calm actions, but he no longer felt the need to leave as soon as the work was done. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, he stood beside her and looked out over the wide land. The sky glowed with soft light, and the wind moved gently through the grass. "I came here to chase trouble," he said quietly, "but I found something better." She looked at him with calm understanding. "Sometimes the trail leads where we don't expect," she said. He nodded. "I'm glad it did."
They stood together as the light faded, knowing that the journey ahead would still have challenges. Life on the land was never simple, but they also knew that they would face whatever came with patience and respect. The man who had once ridden alone had found a reason to stay, and the path before them felt steady and real.